We're all good now. Okay, thanks for remembering that, Lynn. I appreciate that. So Lynn is an educational linguist who runs a large tutoring practice and education consultancy in Melbourne, Australia. She's the author of 3 books, Spelling for Life, Language for Life, and Reading for Life, and creates and administrates courses for educators to help bring linguistics to teaching. She also works closely with schools and school districts around the world to help them keep improving their literacy instruction by awakening linguistic curiosity in their students. She has extensive experience advocating for children with learning difficulties and strongly encourages schools to lift their Tier 1 literacy instruction to heights that get the best deal for the vulnerable population she works with. She is a council member for the Learning Difficulties Australia and a sought-after speaker at international conferences such as Research Ed and the Reading League. And without further ado, it is my honor and privilege to introduce you to Lyn Stone.
Thank you, Donna. It is a huge honor for me and a privilege. And I've got to say, massive congratulations. 100,000 members, that is no mean feat. What it shows me is that people are thirsty. They're thirsty for knowledge that they didn't get in college. They're thirsty for knowledge that perhaps they didn't even get in school. And I'm glad that there's somewhere that they can all go. And that's your Facebook page. Absolutely astonishing. So thank you so much. Lovely to see I can see lots of familiar faces here. It's so nice to see you all. We're going to do a tiny bit of admin before we get into the presentation proper. So as you may have read in the sort of the instructions for Zoom, I love talking to people. I love answering questions. I love having dialogue, but there are so many of you today that I'm not going to be able to answer your questions in the time that we've got. I'm rushing away after this. I've got to go on holiday for me. And so I'm not going to be able to hang around too much. But what we'll do is, please, you are welcome to put questions into the chat, and Donna and I will collate them, and we'll try to answer them as best we can back on the Science of Reading Facebook page that Donna is the admin for. So we'll get there with questions for sure. What I'm trying to avoid is conversations starting in the chat, because it can get really heated really fast, especially with grammar, right? Because everybody's got their own version of how words work together in their heads, and so it can get really emotional. So I'm trying to sort of encourage questions rather than huge amounts of dialogue in the chat, because again, there's a split attention effect that happens as well when people start to chat to each other in the chat. So if you don't mind, you know, we'll reserve that dialogue, I think, for the Facebook page, which is a perfect platform for that. This is being recorded, so and there's a transcript of the chat that happens afterwards, so you can, when you write things, I get a kind of transcript of that, so it's not like I'm going to lose what you've said. And your voices and your faces, if you do talk, will be on the recording. That recording takes a while to upload, it takes a while to render and edit, and so in about 24 hours, I'll be placing that on the Resources Hub on my website, and hopefully you got to the Resources Hub and managed to download and print one of these. You don't have to print it, but if you like to teach along, if you like to read along, it's right there. So that that's your follow along document. If you didn't get it, we can help. I've got 2 links there. The first is to the Resources Hub, and I'll put that in the chat again, just in case for some reason it didn't come through to you. So that's going now, and that's where the handout is. It is password protected because this is exclusively for you guys, and your password is GFL10. GFL means Grammar for Life. I know that there are some people who've written GLF and then wondered why they can't get to the hub. It's Grammar for Life, right? So that's why it's GFL10. All right, let's get on with it. Let's get on with it. I'm going to share my screen with you now, and we will talk grammar for the next little while. And when I say now, I mean when my computer stops misbehaving.
Doba.
There we go.
Hi.
Christiane, one of the admins here, if your microphone goes on, what Christiane's going to do is she is going to just switch it off for you, just because if there is background noise, what will happen is the mic will go to you rather than the presentation, then people won't hear what I said. So try and keep your mics off if you possibly can. So Grammar for Life now, as you can see in this illustration here, there's a way that I look at words and what they do and how they're related to each other, and I've put them on this diagram. We'll come back to the diagram. You don't have to, you know, sort of parse or translate that right now, but that's where we're headed for this. Bit of an introduction to me though, because you might wonder who this weird sounding person is talking to you today. Well, this is me and this is my family. I am a Scottish linguist, so and I'm in private practice, which means I studied the structure of language at university, and then I went straight into special ed. You know, I sort of I was very lucky. I just sort of landed in speech pathology clinics and special ed. I was educated in the UK. I was educated at University College London, but I have a lot of affiliations with the United States. This guy here, that's my husband. He's from Palo Alto. And so we've spent lots of time back there. And I lived in Washington, DC for a year when I graduated high school. So I was a nanny there as well. So yeah, I'm really into the US. And but I live in Australia because it's a really, really, really good place to rear children. So these are my two children here, Sasha and Imogen. And we're here because there's lots of room and sunshine and that sort of thing. But little Imogen, the younger one, is nearly grown up, and we plan to live in New York for the next decade once she's left school. So I'm coming over there. Be warned, I'm coming over there. My husband is a US citizen, and we'll spend about a decade there, just soaking up the loveliness that is the United States again. So there it is. That's my background. Why I write about grammar? Well, I want to mention one of my favorite people in the universe, and that is Richard Hudson. So he's a professor emeritus of linguistics at University College London, and that's where I got my degree. And I was really, really lucky to be under the tutelage of Richard. He's one of the most highly respected grammar professors on the planet. At the time that I was there, he was developing an approach to teaching grammar called word grammar. And he taught me all about how words work together in the form of, you know, diagramming sentences and you know, talking about the networks that words form, not just words on their own, but how they interact with one another. And I was just really, really lucky to be under his tutelage. He was very kind to write the foreword for my second book, Language for Life, from which a lot of what we're doing today is extracted. And this is what he said about grammar. And if you go to page 1 of your handouts, if you do have those, then I'll get you to read. I just love the way he puts it. Give you a second. So he was very kind. He talked about it doesn't come to us fully developed by Mother Nature. And actually, Richard is in the throes of writing his own book on teaching grammar. And I keep checking in to see when that's going to hit the shelves, because that's going to be amazing. So that's on page 1. Also on page 1 of your handout, there are some conclusions. There are some boxes there for certain conclusions that I'm hoping that you can answer by the time we're finished. I get many emails and messages from teachers and schools about teaching grammar, and there are a few questions that come up quite a lot. So by the end of this presentation, maybe you'll be closer to some of the answers to the following questions, such as, is teaching grammar to kids important anyway? Well, I think you can probably guess what my answer is, but it's up to you to write something about that as a reflection at the end. Also, I get asked, well, where are you supposed to start? Where are you supposed to start? So I try to answer that as much as I can. I also get asked, how far do you go? Because let's face it, right? You can really take a microscope to grammar. You can look at tiny, tiny nuances of how words go together to transmit thoughts. I mean, you can get really, really bogged down. And in fact, at university, one of the books that really made me work very, very hard was called Government and Binding Theory by Lillian Hageman. And honestly, as a sort of a 19, 20-year-old, it was so hard to get my head around it, because you can really get very, very in depth about grammar and about how words relate to one another and how utterances relate to one another. So how far do you go as an educator? How fine-grained do you make it? Well, again, I've got some suggestions for that. So here we go. What we're going to talk about today are the 3 simple things that words do. We're going to talk about the basis of word formation, and we're going to talk about the link between the parts of speech and morphemes. We're going to end with 3 conditions for introducing prefixes and suffixes. So I'll unpack all of that. And the reason I put that together in that order with those constituent parts is because, again, this helps to answer a lot of the common questions that I get about teaching grammar. And it may also clear up some misconceptions about grammar too. Firstly, though, let's take a very, very broad view. With grammar, you can get really complex really fast, but I always start by zooming out and discussing with my students the 3 simple things that words do. Firstly, take a moment to contemplate the fact that the world over, regardless of race or culture, when humans want to get ideas across to one another, they have to name the things they're talking about. And they have to refer to what those things do and what those things are and what those things have. Isn't that amazing? Now, there are countless ways to do this. And there are all kinds of rules of order and form and relevance and so on. But for communication to successfully take place, no matter the details, no matter the language, race, culture, you have to mention the things, and you have to mention their do, be, have. In grammar, those are the nouns and the verbs, and they're kind of a big deal. On page 3 of your handout, you've got a version of this sentence frame. I've taken the noun fish and I've created 3 different sentences using a do, be, or have verb. Now, I've taken the word fish because at Lifelong Literacy, I run a practice here where we see children and adults who struggle with some aspect of literacy. And what we've done over the past few years is we've changed our model of teaching to a much more knowledge-building approach. So the sentences that we use, the examples that we use, are always drawn from the unit of study that we're doing with our students. And fish and birds and animals come up a lot. So we're doing factual things to demonstrate what we're talking about. So each time the subject of the sentence, the noun, the thing that we're talking about has a do, a be, or a have verb. So fish swim, very, very simple. We've got our subject fish and we've got our verb swim. And that's a do verb, right? It's a thing that the fish does, okay? It's an action. And that's sometimes where grammar stops. That's sometimes where grammar teaching stops. I hear parroted an awful lot, children saying, a verb is a doing word. And yes, it is, but also there are other verbs, right? For instance, fish are aquatic. See this are part? That's a verb of state of being. That tells us what the fish is. That tells us the being of the fish. Same with have. Fish have scales. That's a have verb. So on your handout on page 2, there are lots of other possible verbs of state of being. So in the blank squares, you can use this framework with your students to get them to create sentences that also contain do, be, have verbs. The point of this exercise is that I think it's important to go beyond the simple a verb is a doing word that I hear parroted all the time without much more insight. It gets confusing because versions of be and do and have can also be repurposed as auxiliary or helping verbs in utterances like the fish were swimming, the fish had been swimming, and so on. But taking it one part at a time is really helpful. And for that, I also have this model. So this gives us another model. It's the bare minimum sentence frame on page 3. There are many more elements in sentences, of course, but it's not a complete thought until the noun and the verb are there, implied or otherwise. So this sentence frame on page 3 is a model of that. The noun can have a determiner like the, or an, or a, or it could even be a pronoun, she, he, it, we, you, they, plus a verb. And that verb, so the noun is, does, or has at some point in time, all expressed by the verb. And these are the bare minimum components of a complete thought. It's a good idea to go through this with kids. It's the building block of everything else that we do in terms of sentence structure and grammar teaching. The thing about nouns and verbs, though, it wouldn't be a lot of fun if we didn't add a bit of color, right? So yes, a complete thought is nouns and verbs, but we don't just go around naming things and shouting verbs like cavemen. You know, we don't go elephant, mammoth, run, right? Okay, we do a lot more than that in our utterances because we've evolved to communicate complex concepts. So what we do is we modify those ideas. We modify our nouns and our verbs by using adjectives and adverbs. Now, nouns get a lot of help. Nouns have more supporters, if you like, servants, a bigger retinue than everything else. There are some words that are just there in order to help the nouns along. And one of those types of words is adjectives. Adjectives modify nouns. They are there as descriptors for nouns. They're for nouns only. Adjectives don't modify anything else. Adverbs, on the other hand, modify verbs, true, but they also modify other modifiers. So they modify adverbs and they modify adjectives as well. So adverbs are sort of for the other parts of speech, whereas nouns, they've got their servants and that's it. Adjectives modify nouns. So I'll show you some examples of that. So we've got our fish and we've got our being verb, and usually after a being verb, we'll have an adjective, we'll have a modifier that is modifying fish. So fish are aquatic. And if I just had fish have scales, then I've got my noun, my verb, and my object, my subject, verb, object. But I can modify scales by placing an adjective right there. So they're for nouns. Adjectives are for nouns. However, we can also modify other parts of speech. So if we say swim as our verb, fish swim, I can modify the way that they swim by using this word gracefully. Adverbs, a lot of the time in English, end with the adjective forming suffix ly. That's one of the ways that you can kind of get a suspicion and follow up on, is this an adverb, right? So they modify verbs, but also check this out. Fish, there's our subject, have, there's our verb, yep, and they have scales. And in our last sentence, fish have hard scales, we modified scales by placing this adjective hard there. Do you see how they have a relationship? The adjective modifies the noun scales. However, if I want to even turn up the volume, right, on how hard, I can use an adverb to modify my adjective. That's what adverbs are for. They're not just about verbs. Just because they've got the base verb in the word adverb doesn't mean it's just for verbs. Actually, this base verb is the Latin word for word, right? So if you're verbose, you use lots of words, right? If you do something verbally, you do it with words, not verbs, right? So adverbs, and this is again a subtle difference with sort of traditional surface level teaching of grammar. Adverbs modify other words. So there we've got the adverb modifying the adjective. And you can take modifiers out and the sentence still makes sense. Fish have scales. Yep. Fish have hard scales. Fish have very hard scales. There you go. So that is our modifiers. And that's on page 4. And you've got, again, a do-it-yourself framework there that you can add to right now, or you can do it with your students. What else can we put within that framework? Easy, huh? All right. But what fun would that be? Okay, we've added color, but we could speak in one subject, one verb sentences. But even with modifiers, it's all kind of boring and unexpressive if you don't have ways of connecting the words and phrases and clauses up, right? It's kind of boring if you don't join it all together. So the third section, the third thing that words do from a big picture point of view is that they connect. They connect. Nouns, of course, get their own special dedicated staff, and those are the prepositions. So if you look at this, if you look at this chart now, you'll see this whole column, nouns, absolutely in the service of just the nouns. So prepositions connect nouns, adjectives describe nouns. Everything else, they kind of all work together, but these are for nouns. These are for nouns. Prepositions will connect nouns to other parts of speech. There's always going to be a noun there or implied. So now we've got the three basic things that words do. You've got your basic elements, so complete thought taking place in the presence of these two, nouns and verbs. Then you've got your modifiers, and then you've got your connectors. That's the three things that words do. How cool is that? So let's look at prepositions before we move on to conjunctions, because prepositions are for nouns. Here is a model of prepositions and their relationship to nouns. So your definition, and you can write this on your handout as well, prepositions connect a preceding noun or verb to a following noun. So somewhere within that utterance, you're going to have preposition and noun. And there are various things that can be connected to that preposition noun partnership. Now, here's something else that's interesting. Whereas you could alter the form of nouns, like say we had fish, you could make that singular or plural. And you can alter the form of verbs, you know, like swim, swam, swum, swimming, swims. And you can alter the form of adjectives. So you can say hard, harder, hardest. Prepositions, like adverbs in the preceding chapter, can't be altered. As the lessons proceed with the children that you're working with, you'll begin to notice this. You can't actually throw anything on the end of preposition. You can't alter them. So prepositions are your first unalterable class of words. Isn't that interesting? And we'll come back to that in the word formation exercise. So there are some possible prepositions. There's a box full of them on page 4, and you can put them together in sentences with your students as well to see how they relate to that noun. You're always looking for that noun. That's what prepositions do. They say this noun relates, this is the relationship this noun has to the other elements in the sentence. Of is one of the prepositions that when I was learning all this, found really surprising. Of course it's a preposition. It shows relationships between that noun and the other elements in the sentence. So there you go. Conjunctions, these are the other joiners, they're the other connectors. And the definition of a conjunction is it's basically a connector for the other parts of speech, right? You can use conjunctions with nouns, but you don't necessarily have to. I like the etymology of conjunction. It's con, so Latin con meaning together, and jugare, to join together. I like that a lot because what it does is it joins all of these, they join elements in sentences, and not just the individual words in sentences, you know, like I was running and I was walking and I was skipping, but they join larger parts of sentences to one another. And by larger parts, we're now getting into the amazing and frightening world of phrases, clauses, and sentences, right? Conjunctions are the oil, they're the oil in that machinery. So what I like to do, I spend a bit of time on conjunctions with my students, and if you are a fan of the writing revolution, then this is going to be dead familiar to you. But the kids that we work with really, really like playing the and, but, because thing. And this is what we do. Let's take fish swim, and then I'll say to them, fish swim, and they will make up sentences that follow on, that give us sort of equal, because and means we've got equal elements either side, like a seesaw. Yeah, fish swim and what? I'll let you think of it. Fish swim and do what? Or fish swim, but there's lots of things when you change direction like that. It's your conjunction is telling you to end that sentence differently. Or fish swim because they can't fly airplanes. I don't know, right? So we play that a lot, and that gives children a really good conceptual understanding of conjunctions and what they're for, and how we can alter shades of meaning just by altering the conjunction and the following clause. How interesting. And even young children can orally play that game. So it's a really, really good one to do. So amazingly enough, in half an hour, you and I have gone through all of the major parts of speech. We've looked at the big picture, the big, broad, 50,000 feet view of the three main things that words do. And to sum it up, words are vessels, and they contain all kinds of information. They work together to produce the infinite variety in the transmission of human thought. In any language, the rules about how they are permitted and not permitted to work together are contained within the grammar of that language. Language for Life, the book and online course, is an expansion of what we covered today, as well as a look at how to use dictionaries properly and how words are formed. And that brings me on to the next part of the webinar, the basis of word formation. So on page 5 of your handout, we've got a framework there for the definition of these 4 words: base, root, prefix, and suffix. And sometimes a little bit of confusion about what each one of those means. So I thought we'd go over them together. One of the reasons I'm doing this as well is that I read a lot of questions on social media by teachers who've come across some word or another, and they're trying to break that word into parts that can be taught and remembered by their students. And I love that. It's great that these questions are coming up about how do you teach this word? I think a helpful approach would be to first step back and think about how words are formed. And that then comes with some key terms that we're going to do together. There are common elements in all words, and it helps to think of the fact that all words are bases, a bit like this Lego base. So every single word you have is, at bare minimum, a base. And onto that base, you can add other elements, and sometimes you can't, right? Sometimes you can't alter the base. Bases go back to roots. And so what I've got here in this, I will admit it, right, not very pretty illustration, is our base and then the roots down here, right? So common elements in words, bases and roots. And sometimes those words are used interchangeably. The way I try to look at it is that a base is a word part that can stand on its own or needs some other parts put at the beginning or at the end to form a word. That's a base. Sometimes words can go right back to a sort of what's called a root word, right? Words can be traced back through history and through time to the original word. That's the root. Yep. So I love the fact, the words from color. If you look up the etymology of color, like what the meaning and the history of color words, there are quite a few words that go back to this root, G-H-E-L, meaning gold or shining. And so we get yellow, but we also get other words and other colors and so on from this root. So that's the root that can give rise to lots of different bases. Also, though, at the beginning of bases, we have prefixes, and at the end, we have suffixes. So when I see this question on social media that goes, how do you segment this word into sounds? I think a more helpful question would be, what are the morphemes? Where's the base in this word? What root does it go back to? For instance, the word science, we could say, how do you segment this word into sounds? And then lots of answers come through, and that's fine, but science and schism and shin even go back to the root sec, to cut. And this is a really interesting approach, I think. Really interesting approach, much more interesting and usable, dare I say, and transferable than just segmenting words into sounds. You can look all of this up. There are lots of different reference materials that you can use. Etym Online is an absolutely fantastic place to go. Also, though, the Oxford Etymologist. The Oxford Etymologist is he's a historian and a linguist, and works in Minnesota, actually, in Minneapolis, and at the University of Minneapolis, and his name is Anatoly Lieberman, and he chases down the bases and the roots and publishes a blog on it every week. It's a really good place to go. But anyway, we could spend all day on that, right? But a better question is, what are the morphemes? What's the base, and what are we adding to that base, like Lego? I'll show you some more stuff about bases, right? So if you go to page 6, there's a word parts table there, and we'll start with single free bases, right? So a single free base is a word base that you can alter, or maybe you can't alter, but it stands on its own. It's a word on its own. So what I've got here are some examples. A noun single free base would be fish, a pronoun, which is a word that makes us think of a noun. It refers to a noun somewhere back in the history of the utterance, right? Or the communicative exchange. It refers to a noun. So we've got pronoun, her, verb, play, adjective, fair, adverb, ever, preposition, under, and conjunction, so. So we're going to take those and we're going to play about with them a little bit. They're free bases. They can stand there all by themselves with all their meaning right there, intact. They don't need anything to help them along. We can take another base, right? So remember that Lego base that you have there? We can actually take another base and put it with those bases to form a compound word. So that's one of the ways that we form words. We go base, base. And in English, we only do that, we don't do that for that many bases. But if any of you speak German, how much does German compound, right? So sometimes, Übergruppenführer or whatever, right? Sometimes they have base after base after base because languages differ. The grammar of languages differ, and the rules surrounding the formation of words differ. But in English, basically, there's base plus base. That's one of the things. So with fish, we can add that to tail and get fishtail. With her, it could be herself, play, play park. And I do some work on this with students. What other base plus base constructions do you know? Fair, we've got fairway, ever, evermore, under, underneath, and so. Also, that's all plus so. Yep, also. So that's base plus base. That's a compound word. That's fairly simple. Also, though, you can get a base and you can add an affix. And an affix is the umbrella term for a prefix or a suffix. There are these things called infixes as well, but we're not going there today. If you really love that stuff, there's lots of courses and books on that. I think Steven Pinker does a really, really good job of talking about infixes in The Language Instinct. That's my favorite text on language, basically. But Pinker's Language Instinct, if it really floats your boat, that's a good one to read. But anyway, let's get back to this. Base plus affix. So let's take fish again. And I can't add a prefix to fish. I don't think we can unfish. Maybe we can refish, sort of. But I can inflect that word in that I can add some suffixes, some parts at the end that give us a bit more grammatical information about fish. So I can add a plural forming suffix, es, or I can add ing. Today I am fishing. Yeah. With her, again, I can't add a prefix, but I can add a suffix. Her can turn to hers and change into possessive case. We've got play, and I can add re at the beginning, and I can add things like and ing at the end. So I can put prefixes and suffixes on words like play. With fair, I can change it into its opposite by adding a prefix un, or I can even change the adjective fair, the modifier fair, into a noun by adding a noun forming suffix ness, fairness, right? So this is all the ways you can play about with and form words. With ever, did you know that ever plus the prefix ne, meaning not, becomes never? How cool is that? Ne is in negative as well, and necessary. Yeah, cool is it? It's very cool. All right, there's always you can look inside words and find those word forming elements. It's actually a really good game. With under, we can't alter that with a prefix. We can put two bases together underneath, but we can't alter it with prefixes or suffixes. And it's the same with so. Again, I can add a base to a base, but you can't say so's or sewing or unsew. These are unalterable. So there you go. That's base plus affix. Here's the thing about suffixes though. Suffixes can be trickier, right? They can be trickier. I'll show you what I mean. You can have two different types of suffixes. So suffixes come in two different categories. You've got inflectional suffixes, and what they do is they bend. Yeah, they bend the actual word. They don't change the part of speech that the word is. So English actually has about 8 inflectional suffixes. I'll show you in this table. There's a little element here that has to move. But so we've got, say we have nouns like dog, for instance. I can keep the word dog as a noun dog, but if I add this suffix here, this S, and I've got dogs. Yeah, so I've changed it into a plural. I can also add this suffix, apostrophe S, and show that it's something belongs to the dog. It's something of the dogs. Yeah, apostrophe S actually means of. It means of. It's a shorthand way of writing of. But all hell breaks loose when people try to teach it. But there's an easy way to teach it, which we can't go into because we're running out of time today. With verbs, I can show, they can still remain as verbs, but I can show tense. I can show when the be, do, have happened by adding ed and s and ing and even en. It was eaten. With adjectives, I can make them more and most. So they're still adjectives, but I can add these inflectional suffixes and change that adjective just slightly. Still adjectives. However, derivational suffixes, which is what we're going to look at next, actually indicate what part of speech the word is. And sometimes they can even take a base and change it from a noun to a verb and so on. I'll show you how that works. You ready? Derivational. Oh, and by the way, I love the, in the word derivational, we've got the base here, riv, and riv means stream, run, flow. So it's like you're starting here, right, on the river of words, and you're flowing, you're running from one place to another. You're running down river. That's why they're called derivational suffixes, because you're changing them into a different part of speech. Whereas inflectional suffixes, we're not changing them. We're not moving their position from one word category to another. We're just bending them a bit. And that's why they're called inflectional. Flect means bend. So you get words like reflect and even flexible from this base. Oh, so much information, but let's go to derivational suffixes. Are you ready? And this brings us into the link between parts of speech and morphemes. First of all, nouns. Suffixes that indicate that we have a noun or can change words into nouns are hood, ness, like childhood and wellness, uns, like inheritance, independence, ian, like celebration. So I've got my verb celebrate, and I can add the suffix ian, and then I can take the verb celebrate and turn it into a noun, celebration, the name of something, right? Same with ian in region. Reg, this base here, is it's a bound base. It's one that needs a prefix or a suffix to make sense. So ian does that. And reg means to rule. So a region is where the ruler has his or her power. So we've got reg and rex from there, meaning king or ruler. Yeah, I love that. It's very cool. Same with T, you've got enmity and ability. We can turn those into nouns. We can turn, other words like enemy and so on. We can indicate the thing you feel for your enemy is enmity. And I really love enmity because actually it actually comes from an absence of liking, an absence of love, or amour, or amo, amas, amat in Latin. It's all the same They all the same base. It's really interesting. Anyway, so, and then you can get this verb enjoy, and you can turn it into a noun with mint, enjoyment. So those are some examples of suffixes that do that, that indicate or change, and they're called derivational, going down the river. Then you can do the same sort of thing to form adjectives. This base here, fin, meaning end, you can indicate that's an adjective by adding an adjective forming suffix al. Fin becomes final. So finish, final, and at the end of European movies in French, you'll see fin, F-I-N. That means the end, right? So it's very cool. We can turn this noun fame into the adjective famous. As you can see, when you add suffixes to bases, sometimes you have to change the base. And so teaching children how to do that's a really, really good lesson as well. But you've got to start with what these parts of speech are in the first place before you start doing all that sophisticated stuff around changing bases with suffixes. And it's not hard. It's actually not hard to teach all of this stuff. Same with the adjective red. I can make it a little bit red by adding ish, right? Same with depend, or even pend, that base there. Yeah, I can turn it into independent or dependent. So I've added I've added a prefix to, two prefixes to pend, in and d, and then I've added the suffix nt. Do you see how they're all broken up like that? If you break words up into their morphemes, into their meaningful units, you're going to have more success up the track, and you're going to be able to transfer sound and meaning better than if you just break words like independent into its sounds. English spelling, and spelling's a big subject. You know, I mean, I've written a whole book and program on it because it's massive. It's massive, and it's not well taught in teacher training. Spelling wasn't, the orthography of the language wasn't just put there to transmit sound. Spelling is to transmit sound, to convey sound, but also to convey meaning. And if we get into teaching meaningful units quickly and early, and we can with systematic instruction, all the better for students, because we are really paying attention to meaning. You can also take the noun mud and you can add the suffix e, and there are suffixing rules for that as well, turning it into an adjective. Lastly, you can make verbs out of bases. So 8 is a good one. Yeah, 8 is a suffix that indicates that we have got a verb. Same with n, shorten. I will go ahead and shorten this. Fi is a very clear verb forming suffix, and eyes, like idolize and familiarize. And have you noticed that there's ISE, IZE in the spelling? Guess what? That is not British American. That's not the difference between British and American spelling. I know there's a big misconception about that. It's actually not. The difference between ISE and IZE is an Oxford-Cambridge thing. It's just that in America, they've taken more, they've gone with the Z spelling more. And so sometimes you look at somebody's spelling with IZE in it and you go, oh, that's an American, but it's not actually. And I reserve the right to toggle between the two, because you know what? ISE and IZE, it's not ambiguous. You still know what I meant, whether I use ISE or IZE. It's not a hill worth dying on. All right, so that's the hardest part. Those are the morphemes, the suffixes, the parts of speech. But if you are going to teach this stuff to students, these are the 3 conditions that I recommend before you introduce prefixes and suffixes. There's the 3 conditions. First of all, when students can reliably form, transcribe, and read the letters E, R, N, and U. Bare minimum. I'm not saying that these are the letters that you need to teach first. I'm just saying that within the scope and sequence of your systematic synthetic phonics program, when they are able to form, transcribe, and read those letters, not just read them. Yep, I mean form. I mean put them on a page with their hands and a writing implement. When they can transcribe them, and that means not just copying them, but when you say eh, they can write that down from what you've said, or when you say a word with "eh" in it, they'll know to write that grapheme. That's what I mean by transcribe. And also, yes, they need to be able to read those letters, amongst others. So when that's happened, then the next condition is they can reliably count up to 3 syllables orally. Any of you are doing Haggerty or using David Kilpatrick's works on phonological awareness, then it's not going to be very long before they're able to do that. Right? Counting syllables is a relatively easy thing for children to do if they're explicitly taught and they get some really good practice. So when they can do that, and last thing, last condition, when you've studied the word do and its family, because here's the thing with the word do, if you're teaching that the letter O corresponds to the sound O, then you're going to need to do something else for do, and you're going to need to do it really quickly. Yeah. So when you studied the word do, and I don't recommend just saying, well, this time it says do. There's actually a family where the O represents oo in words, and there's no reason not to introduce that very, very quickly to children. So that's do, to, who, shoe, lose, prove, canoe, you know, it's a small family. When you've studied that word and its family, then it's the ideal time to introduce the concept of affixes, concept of prefixes and suffixes. And the way that you do that is basically you write the word do, and say, this is do, write it down. Now, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you the actual lesson on that. Are you ready for this? Oh, back you go. Here we go. And I'm going to do it with the scribbliest presentation writing in the world, but you'll have to bear with me. So this is the word do. Yep. What are we going to do today? Did you do your homework? And so on. I can put these 2 letters at the beginning of this word, and I can change the meaning of do. These 2 letters, re, give us the prefix re. If you redo something, you do it again. Re means again. Redo. Isn't that cool? Write it down. So I get students to do that. What word? Redo. What does it mean? Put it in a sentence. Pair share. Come up with a sentence for redo. I'm going to redo my homework because the dog ate part of it, and so on. All right, that's great. Now, looking at do again. Everybody write do. I can add a different prefix this time, and I can change the meaning of do again. Check it out. What prefix? Un. Good. Put it together. What word? Undo. If you undo something, because un means not, you, rather than doing it again with re, you make it so that it hasn't been done. For instance, if you do up your laces, your shoelaces, I don't know if people even do that anymore in the world of Velcro, right? But if you do up your laces, you can undo them. You can make them not done. Yep, undo. Or if you write something and then you get your rubber, you can rub out that word. You can undo it. You can undo lots of things. And you can redo lots of things. That's re and un. Back or again and not. And you do lots of work on that. You can go, as soon as you've introduced AY, you can take play and you can go, I can replay something, and so on. It doesn't take long to be able to introduce these concepts. It doesn't take long. And in a handout that you're going to get after this, there is a suggested scope and sequence and some tips on introducing this to novices, to small children, because you know what? They're really good at it. They're really, really good at it. There's no reason to hold off on this kind of teaching at the very beginning. The question now is, what next? Well, if you liked what you saw there, there is a whole course called Language for Life. It goes into grammar, syntax, and dictionary use and morphology. There's also a mini course that doesn't go into dictionary use and morphology called Identifying and Connecting Parts of Speech. So all of these courses can be done online. The thing about them is that they are, oh, and I'll show you the other courses as well, so I've written a whole bunch of them. The thing about them is that you can do them any time of the day or night, and if you have come to any of my lessons in my pajamas that I've done during lockdown, you'll see that I'm a big fan of working in your pajamas. So you do them any time of the day or night, but I do personally go on to the courses and I answer questions on the courses as well. So I have lots of dialogue with the people that are on there. So there you go. Those are all the courses that I have. You can find all of those at lifelongliteracy.com. Until the 15th of July, you'll get 10% off any of the online courses with this code. It's the same code that got you into your resources for today. It's GFL, Grammar for Life 10. That'll be there till the 15th of July. Another key date about the 15th of July is that the Resources Hub that you've got your handouts from, and the video, which will go up in 24 hours from now, they will all be taken down on the 15th of July and they'll be gone. There won't be a repeat or even footage that will be available to watch. So if you can, try and get all of that to your hard drive or watched before July the 15th, because it all goes away then. These are all the ways to stay in touch with me. I've got a website, as you probably have gleaned. My Twitter handle is lifelonglit. You can email us at info@lifelongliteracy.com. Facebook, Lifelong Literacy, amazingly enough. And I have a newsletter called Language Fountain that you can sign up for on the website or on social media. We are about 6 minutes from the end, and I really do have to be very, very punctual this morning. I can see why, I can see loads of questions and they look amazing, and I'm going to be very, very interested in answering all of those. So do please ask more. Of course, I can't do it now because we've got 6 minutes, and I'm trying not to play favorites, even though, Kristin, I really want to answer your question. But I think you may have answered it yourself, right? Why those letters? Yeah. So it's just been absolutely wonderful to see you all. In about, I don't know, an hour from now or so, because I got to grab some brekkie, as they say here in Aussie land, you will have this on the Resources Hub, and that is the morphology, scope and sequence, which I think a lot of people came along for, right? So that's going up very, very shortly. I just wanted to do the training first, just wanted to talk to you about it first. So that PDF is there. Don't forget to save that PDF to your hard drive, because once the 15th of July comes, gone. It'll all be gone, because I constantly update my works, and the works that you see on that Resources Hub is to do with your training that you had today. So I can't leave it there forever, always being updated. So there you go. Donna, are there any closing remarks that you'd like to make? Christy, if you want to unmute Donna, because I don't think she can do that.
I thought I did unmute. So someone mentioned they felt like they've been living under a rock their whole life, and now they see what they can learn. I'm trying to find the exact quote. It was so cute. I feel like I've been living under a rock for so long. This makes so much sense. Thank you.
Oh, how nice. Sweet. Oh gosh.
And there was another question. Is there research that supports how grammar should be taught?
Look, there are schools of thought that will definitely refer to research, but I don't think it's as heavily researched an area as teaching reading. I think there's a lot more, there are many more findings of cognitive science about teaching grapheme, phoneme correspondences and so on, and not so much on grammar. Richard Hudson, if you actually go to his website, because he does, he's even though he's retired professor emeritus and all that sort of thing, he does a lot of research and he does a lot of writing on the teaching of grammar. So it's Richard. I'll just write his name there. And he's very, very approachable as well. So he's got lots and lots of links and lots of research that he and his colleagues have done on teaching grammar and what's appropriate and answering those questions. And he's really approachable. So if you write to him and you know, say, introduce yourself and say, where's that book? He'd really like that.
Just nudge him a little bit. Okay. What do we have here? Do we have any? We have 3 minutes.
There was a question about the certificate, and honestly, I'd never even contemplated making a certificate. But if that makes you happy, then I'm really, really happy to put together a PDF and put it onto the resources hub. But you'll have to scribble your name in it, because there are about 2,000 people that registered, and I don't know what our high number was here today, but we were in the region of 300 people, so I don't have time to print out individual certificates, but I can do a generic one for you if you like, and I'll sign it Mickey Mouse or John Hancock or something. How about that?
I just want to thank you for your brilliance and agreeing to be with us today. It's been wonderful, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of you.
Donna, you're most kind, and when the borders finally open, we have got to have dinner. I will be over there, and we have to have dinner. I'm looking to live in Manhattan, so if anybody knows of any good apartments in about 3 years.
You may have to start looking now.
I know, we are looking, and it's breaking our hearts, actually. There we go.
Well, it'll be lovely to have you, and but the world is small, as we know, and it's all good.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you again so much.
And huge thanks to you, Donna. What a lovely opportunity. You're very, very kind, and I love your
so welcome. Thank you.
We'll get back to you with answers to those questions. But in the meantime, everybody have a terrific evening or day or middle of the night, who knows. And I'll catch you around the traps at some point.
Have a lovely holiday.
I'll wave for a while till people leave, and then I'll shut it down. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Some very cute comments. All right, I'm out of here.
So cute.
Bye.